We finally know who's abstracting next in the digital circus, but it turns out we're also expecting more than just one circus member to abstract after all, as we were already told ahead of time by the show's creator Gooseworks that it was confirmed how one of the future episodes of the show would reveal to us what it's really like for these characters to abstract in the first place, as the closest we've seen to the full process is Jax on the verge of abstraction in episode 6 during his big meltdown, meaning there'd still need to be a circus member in the future that actually goes through this transformation process on screen in order to show us what abstracting is really like. But how do we know that more than just one circus member is meant to abstract in the first place? Well, for starters, we were already told behind the scenes how the rest of the season is meant to be packed with multiple heartbreaking events that make people upset. As not only did the show's creator recently describe episode 5, one of the earlier episodes that came out recently, as the silly before the storm, telling us that this storm that's coming soon is likely going to have more than one huge change that affect the circus members in a big way. But we also know how in this very next episode of the show, episode 7, Gooseworks already told us ahead of time how whatever happens in this episode is gonna make some fans very upset and angry, which is actually where Jax comes into the picture here, as we already know that whatever these big emotional scenes Gooseworks tells us about for episode 7 end up being, they're definitely gonna involve Jax in some way, as not only were we told how the worst thing Jax has ever done still hasn't happened yet, but we're also expecting Jax's biggest moments to happen sometime soon, as after Jax's voice actor thanked everyone for appreciating his performance in the most recent episode of the show, episode 6, Gooseworks responded saying how he still hadn't seen his best moments yet, and it turns out one of these moments is gonna end up being his abstraction after all. But not only that, it's also gonna be followed by another circus member abstracting as well. But how do we know? Well, it turns out there was a huge update involving the abstraction of circus members in the future discovered by multiple different fans of the show. They made a finding that was originally labeled as an educated theory, which came from a very specific scene in episode 5, the intermission scene. While on paper, this scene seemed to generally be a sort of joke scene where a bunch of random things were happening that weren't supposed to have a meaning, this specific part of the episode was actually thrown together with huge lore details about the future episodes of the show, almost like it was actually foreshadowing what we were supposed to see in the future. But how do we know? Well, on top of this being the very scene where we get our first introduction to Ribbit, an abstracted circus member we already know has a huge part to play towards the lore of the show, there ended up being another different scene during this intermission segment that stuck out as important here. You see, during the more chaotic part of this episode, where things started flying around, there's one specific part where something very strange happens. Jax and Pomni get bowling balls thrown on them, Gangle and Ragatha get cakes dropped on them instead, and Kinger gets a bowling ball tossed on him too, only he's able to catch it before he ends up getting tossed over with a black chess piece. A strange sort of separation between the characters and what happens to them during the scene that actually connected to something huge. You see, going back to the original idea we were given behind the scenes, theorists put together how this separation between what happens to the characters during the scene like this meant Jax and Pomni actually abstract, Ragatha and Gangle end up being okay, and Kinger is able to keep himself on the verge of abstracting until something different ends up happening to him. And while yes, hearing it listed out like this seems hard to believe, this wouldn't be enough to fully prove that this order of events is what actually happens. Unless the objects specifically chosen to land on each of the circus members actually had a lot more importance than we originally thought. What if I told you that a bowling ball, the same thing that landed on Pomni and Jax's head, and almost Kinger's as well, was the same exact object that Jax took out of Kaufma's room right after he abstracted? Almost like the same bowling ball was meant to be intentionally reused for the intermission scene to symbolize exactly what happened the last time we saw it in the show: abstraction. which would tell us that Pomni and Jax are next, which even lines up with what we were told by the show's creator Gooseworks, as she had already explained months ago how the circus member closest to going crazy is the one that we'd least suspect, explaining why Kinger is the only circus member who's able to actually fight off this abstraction process instead. The one who seems the most mentally unstable is able to catch the bowling ball during the intermission scene, only right after we see a dark chess piece pop up that ends up knocking him over. Something that actually makes a ton of sense lore-wise, as we were literally shown earlier on how this same exact object was actually Kinger's wife, potentially meaning that his wife somehow saved him from abstraction, leading to the outcome we already saw in episode 3, or something else involving Kinger getting saved from the digital circus, as we were shown in episode 6, how Kinger was the only character who was able to influence and change things in the digital world like Kane. He had the power to escape. And as for the cake landing on Ragatha and Gangle, it turns out this isn't the first time we've seen this object in the digital circus either. In the very same episode as where the bowling ball also popped up earlier on, we were able to see Kane pull out a cake as a sort of offering to Pomni right after she arrived in the circus for the first time. This was his initial offering to her to try to make her happy and satisfied in the digital world. But what was it meant to tell us about Gangle and Ragatha? Well, it turns out there was actually a lot more meaning behind cake dropping on the two of them like this than we first realized, as this same exact symbolism had actually popped up before, only in a completely different story, in the short story known as I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, a story that Gooseworks already confirmed that the amazing digital circus was originally based off of. Meal cakes were provided by the AI ruler known as Am, as something meant to show the control Am had over the humans. It provided them with something to survive while also showing how without these cakes, the humans had nothing. It kept Am in control of them, exactly how Kane, the AI of the amazing digital circus, essentially controls all the humans, offering them cake when they first arrive but never providing what they actually want, an exit. Meaning the same cake returning to symbolize what's meant to happen to Ragatha and Gangle is meant to tell us that these are the two circus members that stay trapped in the digital world, with no hope for an escape. But going back to the most important part of this whole thing, there's actually been a huge update involving Jax that proves just how bad things are meant to get for him. We know he's only meant to progressively get worse and worse, and we're able to reveal more of his story in the future episodes in this video right here. So for what we know about the digital circus early, make sure to check it out.